Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Thanksgiving Eve. It's Wednesday, November 26, 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host with my son, fellow investigator, fellow researcher, co-host Joe Hagmann. We are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear 3 hours of incredible programming, unbiased and uncensored news, information, and analysis that includes a very special guest for our new listeners. Thanks for checking in with us. We appreciate that. You can do so through our Contact Us form on our website at hagmann.com. Folks, you're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in multidimensional 3D format, basically. We look well beyond the headlines, the bylines, the fog of disinformation, misinformation, misdirection, a lot of that. Hey, look over here. No, look over here. Yeah, keep your eyes on the bouncing ball. Well, we bring you the news behind the news. We broadcast live each and every weeknight. And by the way, that includes tomorrow. Invite me to your table tomorrow. Joe will probably be here later on, but I'll be in the studio the entire time tomorrow. Thanksgiving, we broadcast live. Anyway, we broadcast live each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have, on the weekends, our weekend edition every Saturday from 8 to 11 as well. And, folks, I've got an announcement to make right now. This coming Sunday, we're going to be making history, I believe, on the radio. We are going to have Coach Dave Daubenmire, Pastor James David Manning, some others, getting together, talking about race. Now, with the exception of Dave Daubenmire and myself, we're talking about African Americans who are not liking what they're seeing in Ferguson and pretty much banned from the mainstream media. They don't want to hear what these African American, well-respected men within our society. They don't want to hear what they've got to say, but we know you do, and we are going to give them the platform. Dave Daubenmire is going to give them the platform to discuss everything. That's this Sunday, so it's going to be a very special show. Anyway, we're simulcast, folks, in case you don't know, by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. I want to thank Troy there. You can tune us in there at the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for your belief and for your trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. Just thank you, and I do hope that everyone is together. If you haven't got a family, I do hope that you're with family tonight, preparing for tomorrow here in the United States. United States listeners, you're celebrating, of course, our Thanksgiving. Canada celebrated their Thanksgiving last month, but tomorrow it's America's Day. With that, Joe, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, and hope everybody who is not with their family, who is in transit, have a safe travel and have a great Thanksgiving. And as I say with every holiday, enjoy the time that we have left with this relatively calm and stable State of the Union, because we're not sure as to how long this calm will last. But enjoy every moment of it with your family, as I said, because you just don't know when it could change. With that, we have a great show for you guys tonight. We have a man by the name of Douglas Pearson, who is an author, and he is an author of several books. One in particular we'll be discussing tonight, The Dead Sea Souls, and he has done set up a website. It is called Mass Pole Barn, MassPolebarn, and on this website he has free downloads to materials we'll be discussing tonight, as well as his book Dead Sea Souls, and so people can read along as well as hear what Mr. Pearson is talking about. And he has a lot.
And his primary website, by the way, folks, is Douglas K. Pearson. That's Pearson. That's DouglasKPearson.com. That's his primary website. You can learn about him, and he's a Michigan native, a journeyman. He currently resides just west of Rockford, Michigan. There, Brr, can you say that? With his wife and their children, and he's an adventurer. I'll tell you, during his summers, he sails around the Great Lakes on their catch, and he's a man of adventure, a man of many words, many salient words and prescient messages, and certainly deserving of our attention and what have you. Joe, I over-talked you. But with that, let's bring him on. I want to welcome Douglas K. Pearson to the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Doug, welcome.
Thank you so much. For many years, I have been tuning into your show, and I have hundreds of pages of notes because you go parallel with so many things in my research. And tonight, you're actually talking to me, and I'm actually talking to you. And besides being in a state of a semi-shock at the honor, I just hope I get across the message that I'm thankful for you and your guest, who are just providing so much information, so helpful.
Oh, thank you.
Your audience.
If you don't mind, get those notes out. And refresh our memories, because there's just, isn't it interesting? There's just so much information that we never hear about, in the media. You've got to go elsewhere. My goodness.
Exactly. And I was so alone after writing one of my books, The Dead Sea Souls, which came to me in the form of, I thought it was just great inspiration, that I was just a wonderful, incredible writer and so gifted. And then I look back at this one novel, which has kind of just been standing still, and it's moving into a whole new dimension. And it's just quite honored to be open to say that this novel probably isn't my creative genius, or it probably isn't my background or my learning ability or anything like that. Since it kind of came off in a rough draft and I never had to really revision it, my editor loved it right off the bat. It appears that it's more visionary, and it's kind of awkward to say that it did come directly from a vision from God, but there's a chance, Doug and Joe, that this novel came in that form, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Excellent. If we can, we'll go back a little bit into your testimony and your walk with the Lord. What was it? Were you born in a Christian home, or what was it that led you to the Lord?
Yeah, I'm born in a small town in Wayland, Michigan, and a very simple family, and a very small, beautiful church in the country with a white steeple. And I met God there. And my father was a teacher and an adventurer, and so we did our summer sailing and traveling in motorhomes all around the country. But the big part is that when I stepped into my career as a teacher and an English teacher, later on, after I had children, and it was a wonderful career teaching in a Christian school, and then something happened, a little Bermuda Triangle all happened at once. The book came to me, and I started writing it while I was an English teacher. I was a literature teacher. And some of the administrators were encouraging me to be a writer. We need you to be a writer, and we need to get these published. But the book then took an odd turn because it was just so dark. And I basically, in The Dead Sea Souls, it's a story of one of the last surviving families on Earth, one of the last surviving Christian families. They were preppers before prepper was cool, before it was even a name, but back in 2004. The wisdom of a father saw things coming, and he threw a ton of food and water and supplies on a big sailboat. A day came like Otto Frank in the Diary of Anne Frank, where they had to run for it. And he was prepared, and he didn't have to live in a wall like the Franks did, but he fled to the sea on a boat with his family in tow. And as soon as I started writing that and finished it, or near finished, I got fired from the school for some silly things, and my wife had a horrible surgery that went horribly bad, and after 10 years, yeah, she had a few hip surgeries and hip infections, and needless to say, we lost insurances. We had to really fight for our life to find the great doctor. She ended up at the Mayo Clinic for many, many seasons. And as I look back, the tension with losing the job and having bad health, as that's right when the editor came to me and he said, you had a pretty easy life. I'd like you to write me a series of new books now that you tasted the brokenness of life. and I just go, come on. You know, his name is David C. Egner. He's a veteran, retired semi-senior editor at Discovery House Publishers for Daily Bread. And, you know, he's rejected Goodnight over a dozen novels I wrote for him. And he just goes, well, you're growing now, and you're seeing the brokenness of life, and I think you're going to be more sensitive to the bad people in your books, you know, and to the antagonists. So I wrote him a series of new books, and out of that series, one of them was called The Dead Sea Souls, and I wrote it so fast. Within, I don't know if you have done much writing. I'm sure you guys have, and I'm sure your audience has. It's just a great honor to speak to a deep audience, and I just learned so much from their questions over the years. But when I wrote this book, it came out in a matter of 48 to 60 hours. And that's pretty fast for a 65,000-word novel. And it didn't need much rewriting. And from there, I was a changed person the second I typed in the word "the end." And, yeah, I haven't wrote a novel pretty much since. I do a little bit here and there. But the speaking engagements from that book and networking people groups that feel that vibration in the ground, that something is wrong. And all I did when I wrote that crazy novel was calm my heart and listen to the vibration coming out of this culture and be inspired by it. And this is in 2004, 2005. So the inspiration of it was some key words like tolerance and intolerance were coming out. Idealism was coming out in our culture. Idealism was being linked to terrorism with the Patriot Act. And all of a sudden, I started asking myself, you know, I'm an idealist. You know, I submit to a higher authority than the authority of civil law. And the God I worship kind of requires that of me. He doesn't take it too fondly when you stand before him and you say, well, I believed in you, but when it push comes to shove, I guess I didn't belong to you, you know, because I denied you. And I just asked myself, you know, could the atrocities of Europe, could 1/3 of the German population decimated in World War II, could 26% of the Russian population decimated under Lenin, and could Stalin, could that ever happen to America? And looking at the Russian issue was pretty much the Russian Orthodox Church. You know, I started researching Mao, and, you know, it was 6% of the population got eradicated by the communist revolution, but it was 72 million people. And I started looking at the concept of evil, and how the concept of my background is, oh, God's going to protect me, except, you know, for the health that crashed in my wife, and a decade later, we're still finally getting her on her feet. And it was just so inspiring to actually reduce yourself to what God primarily calls a man to do, which is take care of his family, take care of his spouse. And my heart goes out to so many people who are struggling with their spouse with bad health and being the primary health care provider, especially during this difficult time with medicine and the government takeover of 29% of our culture with the Obamacare and the problems that is spinning off and the new problems that no one ever saw coming. So I know, Joe, you're probably in that boat. Everybody you talk to somehow has bad health. I know Rick Wiles, who was very inspiring to me, has been open about his wife and praying for her, and it's just a great honor to pray for, you know, spouses and during this time. So out of that tension of the brokenness of life, I had to ask myself, do I serve a God who's going to provide for me, or do I serve a God who is going to protect me? And that's really, I think, a growth issue. And once you settle on provision, then I think you step into that maturity of an idealist. And once you're there, then you're just in a position where you don't take a lot of crap from culture. And so I could really see that. And I learned so much from the characters of the book that it was a great honor to be chosen to write this book, The Dead Sea Souls. It's currently right now on masspolebarn.com. You can look right at it as you join in. You can see that 100% of the proceeds for all these downloads, which are free, free, but there's a little donation click button, are going to go to Hagmann and Hagmann, because I'm thankful for you guys. You realize that when I wrote the book, I was alone. I mean, I saw the entire country crash right before my eyes. And within moments into the book, the country went on fire. And the government was working in collaboration with evil, and it pointed out that, boy, there is some rebel rousers within our culture, and they're intolerant. They are not accepting of other people. And though that intolerance can't be tolerated by us. Therefore, the tolerant became the vicious ones, like they always do, and started eliminating them. And they framed them, and the EMP went off, and the last thing that was mentioned was that there's a group of radical Christians that had the potential to attack the grid, and once the power went off, the sky was lit up in fire, and it was game on. And it wasn't a bank holiday on Monday type thing. It was mass panic, and people were frightened. And
it was Armageddon, is what you're saying, basically. But am I correct to ask, or to say that in Dead Sea Souls the perpetrators of the terrorism were Christians? Is that what you're saying, or?
Well, that's how it was framed in my book, because I couldn't really. I just had to say what would happen. When Nero burned Rome, who'd he frame it on? And all of a sudden, I just looked through history, and it's like, hey, every government before it crashed, because of bad policy and bad financial policy, they needed a scapegoat. And sometimes it's a Jew, sometimes it's a Christian, sometimes it's this, and sometimes it's that. So I scapegoated this from a historical narrative, and then from that, the story went out relatively clear. The hardest part about this book was understanding the gravity of the Scripture. I mean, he was given authority to make war upon the saints and to kill them. Well, that doesn't really sound like God's a protector. I mean, or if those days weren't cut short, no one would survive. That doesn't really work for me. So like when you watch some of the silly movies by some of the, we'll call them, pre-tribulation writers, which I hope they're right. I really do, Doug. I hope the church is raptured before the crap hits the fan. But in case it's not, we have to develop a theology that prepares for that. And when I looked at some of the silly movies, which I made it through like maybe 19 seconds of it, and I like Rebecca St. James as much as the next person. She was a great actress in one of our movies, The Frontier Boys, we did. And I just really enjoyed working with her as a professional. But in the movie, I think it was called Left Behind, it just dawned on me, they're driving through the city. This is after all moral compass is gone from society. Electricity's on. They stop at a red light. People walk in front of them. The grass is mowed to their right-hand side. The sun's out. And it just kind of got me thinking, I just don't see it that way. How I see it is so cataclysmic. Let's put it this way. There's 50-odd chapters of this book, or 40-odd chapters. I think chapter 4 I touch into cannibalism, and every chapter gets worse. So how do you get that across in an appropriate book? Because I write primarily for teenage men who hate to read. So my audience is relatively young, and how do you get that across? So what I had to do is reduce the scene to where I could just let the story flow, and I didn't have to be involved in the horror of the story. So I created a 17-year-old at night on the third watch or the fourth watch right before dawn, and it's cold and there's dead bodies in the sea, and they have rescued people from the sea somehow because that's where the genocide was, or one of the genocides they were sailing through. And all of a sudden some of the people start waking up, and they start talking. And the 17-year-old doesn't know if he should awake his parents, but he knows how fragile they are because they've been at sea for a long time. And therefore, you can speak about atrocity, and you can enter atrocity into dialogue, and you can give your insights on that through tone and things like that. And so, but my how do you call it? My license as an artist, I didn't have to paint such big strokes. I kind of reduced everything into just these handful of characters from many different countries who were at sea during the genocide and pushed off the boats, and then they could talk to the last helmsman, the 17-year-old, and the 17-year-old could ask questions because she doesn't know anything, or he didn't know what was going on. He's just a kid whose parents were weird preppers, and they got on a boat, and years passed. They just knew that the whole countries were burning. And so now in comes the genocide, and in comes the backstory. And when these characters started telling this 17-year-old their backstory, that's when I knew it wasn't just a story anymore. And Doug and Joe, in all honesty, I was close to losing it myself. As a matter of fact, in the last chapters, the adult father had a chance to speak into this narrative when the asteroid or the glory of God was coming, and it was finally over in a post-tribulation setting, and there was nothing the father could say because I was basically clinically insane from it. And, by doing that, you had to go into places, and the story took me into places, and these people were talking about things, I have to be honest, I have never heard about in my life or in my academic study. And like a lot of your listeners, I got a bunch of fancy degrees. I picked up a master's from Wheaton and a couple great things in writing, but I had no idea. And I'm like your audience. I don't forget things. I watch the History Channel. I haven't stopped learning for 20 years. But when my character from England said what the people of Europe were doing and their debauchery and how they went, and, pick your country. All the countries are sinking. But let's put it this way. In the biblical narrative, people who fell away from God and created their own rules so they didn't have to be accountable, so they didn't have to answer to their own guilt, sometimes they went with the goddess Asherah. And it's like, her and her prostitutes had a temple, and you had to go there and have sex with them, and hey, I'm just being a part of the culture, I can't judge culture, I gotta be a part of this. And then within a moment, in comes Balak, and then all of a sudden you have the masculine deity that you're worshiping, and it's like, oh, it's for fertility, it's a beautiful thing, and that usually went south from there. Worshiping the sacred feminine never stays stationary. It leads to a sinking. Worshiping the sacred masculine never stays sacred. It sinks into a debauchery, and we call that the worship of Moloch. And Moloch is where, in Moloch, if you think through the historical narrative of the scriptures from beginning to end, you can usually see that tone right in there. But Moloch has a little bit different entity because he involves the torture and the abuse and the sexual oppression of children and the burning of them on the altar and the sacrifice of them, maybe so that people can have a more convenient life because the pregnancy or who knows what. I'm not even going to get into it. All I know is that it's very real and it's very disturbing.
And if I can interrupt you here, Doug, we see this in real life, in real time, in today's world with Bohemian Grove, all of these politicians, elected leaders, selected leaders, all of these big time people being invited to the camp at the Bohemian Grove, and cremation of care, and of course the sacrifice, and so
right.
This is what we're seeing.
And that was a part of the historical narrative where anybody who follows anything can see this. Presidents have talked about it, for Pete's sake. And I think Nixon was the most explicit on that, because when he was there, he basically said there's a lot of, blankety blank out there. What the novel took me to and the vision took me to is never before that I was aware of in historical narrative has the culture sunk beneath Moloch to crave and seek relationships with satanic evil or the demoniac. And I'll tell you right now, until Steve Quayle spoke of that 6 or 8 or maybe 10 weeks ago out of the story that broke in the New York magazine, the New Yorker, I believe, and I have to be very careful because I don't know that exactly. All I know is Steve Quayle broke the story, and if he says it, he has a very peculiar knack of speaking truth. And I think that's why people listen to him, because we have a tendency to listen to people who are correct and right and have been proven correct over the decades. And maybe that's why his audience is maybe getting bigger, because all of a sudden it's not just him crying the alarm anymore. It's him speaking to something that has never happened according to my research. And you always have to be careful using the words never. But Doug and Joe, I never saw it in history where the human being has sunk to the point where they crave the sexual relationship with the demonic. This is a little bit beyond a bunch of kids or a bunch of Hollywood producers making a story on the Ouija board. This is something different. When that came about in my story in 2005 or 2006, I didn't have a category for that. I didn't know if I should write it. And actually, I had to condense it through the narrative where the helmsman, who was just writing this for the log, because there was like, I have to write this for the log, because the curiosity was driving curiosity and this kind of impure motive. So the teenager just goes, well, if I have to write it for the log, that's a more noble thing. But then the story's coming out, and the teenager doesn't know what to do with the information. And that was simply awful.
And when you say write it for the log, you're referring to something like a time capsule that is keeping track of everything that's going on from the past into the future, and something that would be added on, like a generational book where people keep track of what's going on.
A ship's log.
Yeah.
A ship's log. Like, once in a while we do sailing trips, and I love sailing the Great Lakes. I think it's some of the greatest sailing in the world. One of the books that is free for download is called Storm, and it actually has a picture of me, or some of the earlier copies do, of me sitting on the bow of a sailboat when I was a teenager. But Storm is simply, it's the book on masspolebarn.com. Storm is the one that's red, because I want the readers to read this in order, so you read them red, white, and blue, and the last one's black. But in the log books is where the actual story of the voyage happens. So, we're sailing into Canada, and you go through customs, and the customs people in Canada, they're kind of different. They say things like, we're so glad you're here. Enjoy your time in the North Channel. The North Channel, as most of our listeners may not know, is a group of hundreds of thousands of islands above Lake Huron in Michigan. And it's just a wonderful area of the world. But the customs officers up there are like, thank you so much for coming. You're going to have a great summer. The water clarity is really good. Catch a lot of fish. And we'll see you on the way out, And if we don't see you, have a safe trip back. You sail back into America, and it's a little bit different experience of late, where the 50 caliber machine guns get pointed at your daughter, at Mackinac Island. And you have to say things like, sir, can you take your finger off the trigger of the semi-automatic rifle that you're pointing at my children? And then, they look at the logbook, and it's just such a jackbooted experience of late that, and it's not just me in Michigan. I mean, I talk to people who used to hunt and fish in Canada. It's like they love Canada, but getting back into America has shifted. And Doug and Joe, maybe you and your audience can talk or call in later. I don't know exactly when that paradigm happened, but something shifted. And it isn't a we work for you type thing anymore. It's, it's extremely hand on the butt of the pistol type of an experience. And it kind of takes the fun out of leaving the country when you got to come back and deal with it.
Very interesting observation. I've heard more than one person describe their return, whether it be from Europe or a lot of conference attendees or presenters. I should say presenters. We speak to a lot of them, and they'll take trips to Israel and come back, and it's a harrowing experience at times with the TSA and the customs officials, and of course I've had my run-in with the TSA. They're to me, they're nothing but a bunch of really jackbooted thugs that have no business doing what they're doing. They're kind of Hitler-esque in terms of their Nuremberg defense. We're just following orders, really. Just to take the grandmother out of the wheelchair, to take the baby and take the child and molest the child, essentially. Do some invasive searches of that pretty girl over there, or if they're so inclined, and there are many that are so inclined. Hey, there's a good-looking guy, go ahead and people think I'm making this up. I'm not making this up. It's really unfortunate what we have allowed this system to evolve into, and so you're absolutely correct. And the last time I went up to Canada, it's been a while, but the last time I went up to Canada, I was met with a lot of, like you said, it was a pleasant experience going up there, and coming back, it was entirely. Coming back, as a matter of fact, I'll just tell you, Doug. Coming back, I had a minivan, and I made it to the Buffalo border, and I went up for a wedding and for an overnight stay. And before I knew it, I had two border agents inside my van. I didn't even know that seriously, I had no clue that they were going to enter my van. And they were looking through things, and I thought, wow, welcome home.
Right, and a different perspective, and once again, a 3D perspective for your audience, because I'm not a big traveler. My wife is Swiss, so we do travel abroad maybe once a year, or maybe twice in a good year. But we've really shut down our travel, period. I bet we fly 80% less than we used to. We drive a lot more to places, but we just, you want your daughter and you want your young boys to be treated like this and be treated in the standing in the line. But do you remember, I was in O'Hare right after 9/11, and I remember watching the TSA. And this is back when they had polo shirts on with little "Hello, my name is," and they had to write TSA and stick it on them, right? And they didn't even have offices or anything. And I remember saying to my kids, because there's a handful of 10 or 15 of them standing right there, and they have a clipboard, and they're handing out pictures of people who are suspects. And, O'Hare, I think it's safe to say that they're the worst. And maybe I'm wrong, because it seems like Boston and L.A. are really trying to catch up. But this is O'Hare. And we're there. It's midnight or something. We're the only people in the airport, it seems like. And my two little children there's one's 4 and one's like 2 or something. And they're kicking a little empty Mountain Dew bottle around. And we're in the back corner of the airport. And he comes running up to us and, strong arms the bottle away from my 4-year-old. It's like, okay, this is not going to end well. And so over the years, I have been observing the evolution of the uniform. And Doug, can you or Joe, can you just encapsulate how dangerous that is, the evolution of the uniform? And you watch it in Nazi Germany. Well, the first thing that Hitler did was a party got their uniform uniforms down. They got a bold emblem on it. And, and I love my country, but I'm telling you, and I'm telling your listeners, and I hope you get the primary theme of this. It is time to make our peace with God, okay? Because right now the book has shifted to where it's just a novel or just a story or just for entertainment. It is now there to equip the church to go underground. And when Rick Wiles said that the other day, or 2 months ago, that he goes, I've been speaking the news for 15 years, and a vision came to me, and now I'm shifting my paradigm to be more of equipping my listenership to go underground and to prepare for persecution. I mean, when I heard that, I drove down to where he was. He was down in Cincinnati, and it's like, I don't know, it's not that far. I didn't fly. I would have flown, but I stick to TSA. But I went down there, and I listened to him give his testimony and share his story of faith and share the vision of his ministry, which dovetails so many with your ministry and so many other ones out there to equip people that the news is no longer enough. Now you need to take action. Now it's one thing to look at the news, but you better start thinking survival. And as of that is where, these beautiful wholesalers are coming up and really helping people out, like America Wholesale, American Survival Wholesale. These are ministries that we need to take advantage of, and that after writing the book and seeing the damage path of the book and seeing things start to click off. I mean, when I wrote that book, there were thousands of banks in the world, Doug. Just for a joke, there's thousands of banks. There are banks everywhere, And I had to reduce the banking industry just to a handful. It's like it's impossible. Even 9/11 didn't do that, Yet, what happens with a few financial crashes? And now the next thing you know, books that banks that don't play ball with the CIA, they have to go away. And banks that do play ball get absorbed into the other ones. Well, I was just making this up, and now all of a sudden it just happened. So there's so many things that are happening from the novel that it no longer was any fun, and I was in a state of shock for years. Like, oh my gosh, this came true. And it's like I had 18. It took me 18 triggers. I had to build up 18 different scenarios, or the vision came to me to build up 18 scenarios before the actual trigger event could happen. So every once in a while, wow, that's a trigger event, and awkward.
Let me remind people, Doug, hang on just 1 second. For listeners joining us late, we're talking with Mr. Douglas K. Pearson. That's Pearson, Douglas K. Pearson from DouglasKPearson.com. It's amazing. This is an amazing gentleman who has written an equally amazing, I want to call it, it's called The Dead Sea Souls, the novel that came as a vision and turned everything upside down. Folks, it's available for your perusal. DouglasKPearson.com, and also MassPoleBarn.com. If you go to HagmannHagmann.com on the right-hand side, there are links to this gentleman's works, but in particular, we're talking about the Dead Sea Souls, and it's amazing, folks. I just want to remind people or tell people that it's amazing how what I would call our ministry, and I use that very cautiously, that term ministry, because I don't know if that's what this. I mean, I don't want to seem presumptuous when I say that, but it's amazing how your lifestyle or your path and our path are very similar in similar ways. So I just want to remind people or tell people who we're talking with, and just throw that out there, that you've really, really hit the nail on the head, I think, with Dead Sea Souls and your novels and your information, and I just so dearly want to thank you. And if I may interject this, because this came to me, and you talk about serendipitous moments, divinely inspired, shall I say. Just yesterday, just today, I received this from a listener. You had mentioned about the uniforms of Nazi Germany, and received this from, and again, I could not have done this, or this could not really happen, I don't believe, without divine intervention. But 25 signs that America is rapidly becoming more like Nazi Germany. This was written by Michael Snyder back in February of 2012. That's nearly 3 years ago, and I got this yesterday. And part of that is talking about the appearance and about, of course, the activities and such. But, folks, what I'm saying is all things do happen. God's got everything under control, and certainly Doug Pearson is speaking the truth when he's talking. So, Doug, with that, I thank you for allowing me to interject all of that. But go ahead and continue, sir.
Well, like most of our audience, we spend our time on Sundays doing more than watching football, and I have nothing wrong with football. I watch a game once in a while. But I also love the fact that the bedrock of America is the church. You know, and after World War II, I guess it was some French who came over, and he wanted to know why in the world we'd sacrifice 200,000 troops in a different soil, conquer a nation, and leave, which was, I think, the first time that happened in recorded history. Well, he came to the conclusion, you know, I think your audience already knows this, that America is great because America is good. That's a great statement, and what a compliment, because the church is the bedrock of our country, and we have always been seen as a Christian nation until of late. We have not been described as a nation of ideals, to my knowledge, ever. We all know we're a nation of ideals. But our first and foremost thing has been one nation under God. And last Sunday, you know, the pastor spoke this passage in Philippians and says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And we need to really understand that peace is really something that is attainable. And even on the terrible night, on the last of the oppressive moments of the last family hunted down to the far reaches of the earth, where drones were still being sent after them before drones even existed, and people were in the water hunting them. And there was a peace there within the people. They were in and out of insanity. They were in and out of comatose. They were in all severe shock. They couldn't sleep. They were just the worst group of people that ever amassed on a sailboat before. But there was a peace there. And at one point, the author writing the logbook puts the pencil down and realizes, you know what? I'm writing the last will and testimony of the human race on earth. It's time for me to make my peace with God. And, you know, this is something we all can do. And great stories in the Bible actually teach us how to do it, which is like that scumbait nation that was in the damaged path of Joshua. And, you know, they dressed up in raggedy clothes and act like they walked 1,000,000 miles, and they made a peace treaty with Joshua. But God honors peace treaties, America. And it's time we make our peace with God, because I'll tell you right now, our leadership is making war against God. And, you know, the wisdom of man and all their might is the foolishness and weakness of God. And it's a little bit time we always remind ourselves of that. Just for the record, God hasn't played his hand yet. The second book on the download site, the one in white, is called Crash. And that is basically the notes from the Dead Sea Souls, where man versus man, or the populators, had great aims, and there's 12 things they did to depopulate the earth in the novel. But also, there was man versus God, and God actually did some things also to bring about the judgment and the wrath of God. And it's very important that we realize that that's a real thing. It has happened. It's in the historical record. And then the third section of the book is self, and how the self can unwind. And so man versus man versus God, man versus self, all of those narratives had to be woven into this book. And I didn't even know that I was weaving them. I I kind of just shut the door of my office and didn't take a shower for a week and kind of just wrote down what I saw. Afterwards, I'm looking at this, and it's like, wait, you clicked off on all of these massive disturbances on Earth that at any moment could be a ice age, or at any moment could alter the temperature so drastically, or at any moment could cause plague, or at any moment could cause disease to run rampant. You know, and then the man versus man, they're doing the genetic modifications and the GMOs, and the mad scientists are doing their thing, and they're mixing this and mixing that. But the big thing in the story that really started shaking me up, Doug and Dave, where it was first, or Doug and Joe, where I first saw that this is more than just a book, was a person I was following named Alan Keyes. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Alan Keyes. He has built my faith. You know, he has said things in his public record that I have built into my worldview. He said once, children in my house don't have freedom of speech because in my house we serve the Lord. And wow, you know, and all of a sudden I could actually back that up and implement that into my parenting schedule. He would say things like, there's no victims in my house. My house is agent-based. And I kind of liked Alan Keyes. And, you know, except for him when he lost his temper, he'd start preaching. I think he had a really great chance. And may a day come when he still does step back into office. I did not even know the name of his opponent. I didn't know who he's running against. I never heard any of his opponent's speeches. All I knew is this. In my novel, I wrote down this concept called stable from a president who was given the speech on TV, and all the Christians were huddled, and everything was freaking out, kind of like today, and the president spoke, and you never know what kind of executive order he was going to give. I didn't even know what executive orders were, and he goes, I'm implementing stable, the social turmoil of activation of brotherhood of law enforcement. I thought I was a genius. I just made this up. But what he was doing was he was networking different law enforcement agencies and all the people who worked for government into a tactical unit. And, you know, this is like before DHS or anything like that. So when you started speaking about Rosebud, a source who was giving insight to this, all of a sudden it just took the fun out of it. It's like, oh, I'm a prophet. Oh, I'm a visionary. Oh, I'm a forecaster. Oh, I'm a brilliant man. And all of a sudden it's like, no, you're writing a last will and testament for the human race, and you better get right with God. You better humble yourself. You better focus on what it truly means to look at the cross. You better handle this with respect, because this is not a vision from Doug Pearson. This is a vision given to Doug Pearson, or Douglas K. Pearson, because of, for some odd reason, you know, I chose you. And Doug and Joe, you may not understand this, but when you have bad health on a spouse and it has crashes everything, our overall house, our health bill it's just countless. When our lawyer says the overall numbers of our health bill, it's just staggering. I didn't even know numbers could get that high. And by the way, you can go to the phone record and you can match when our lawyer just called me to say that we won a lawsuit and they settled out of court against an insurance company, and it's always wonderful when you nail an insurance company. But under Obamacare, when it was coming in, all of a sudden they saw this coming and they just ditched on us, and we just sued for breach of contract. We didn't sue punitive or anything else, but we won that. They call, and then within moments, my wife is T-boned at an intersection at 55, 60 miles an hour. She goes off to the emergency room. We buy tanks up here in Michigan, you know, because the roads are just terrible. And I'm just going to make a plug for Toyota Sequoia, because they just saved my wife's life, and talk about a survival situation. So out of this crash, out of this hearing about the lawsuit, then I get a phone call. The next phone call on my phone is from Joe Hag. Okay. Now, I mailed some packages to you, and I think that's all the packages I mailed out in 7 years. How I'm prepared for this moment of speaking to thousands of people is this. we have like maybe 15, 20 acres here in Michigan. I walk a prayer walk around my property, and I carve crosses into the trees. And the weight of heavy peril that came from this book, where I was shouldering this weight, I didn't know what to do with it. We have this huge financial pressure. I don't even have a job. Okay, I call myself an author. I call myself, I run Michigan Preppers, or I have speaking engagements, or I buy and sell, or I work with a couple lumberjack rednecks once in a while, and I can drop some fancy titles. But for all practical purposes, I made about 19 cents in the last 7 years or something. And I walk this property every day, or almost every day. I try not to walk it too much in hunting season because I don't feel like getting shot. But I carve crosses into the trees where everything means something, and then before you know it, I'm touching my fingers to my lips, and I touch the crosses as I walk by. And it's like, okay, God, you might have a plan for me, but I'm about as lost as you can get. And you know what? I'm going to serve you, and I'm going to serve my wife. And in the mix, I hope my kids are okay, because I can't even be a halfway decent parent. And I'm over at Mayo Clinic for 3 months at a time sometimes, visiting back and forth. And by the way, you don't think health care is important? You go to the Mayo Clinic, because 90% of the people there are from Canada. And in Canada, when you get sick, you meet with people like, who's the people they send you in America right before you're kicked a can? There's a name for this branch of medical doctors. Hospice. Okay. 17, 18-year-old girl, kidney trouble. Hospice comes in, and they bring a list of tombstones with them. And then the dad looks at the daughter and looks at the doctor, and he goes, you can't really swear here, but you got to be crap. This is what you got? It's like, well, we don't know what it is, so it's fatal. Well, the dad goes to the bank, takes a second mortgage out of his house, gets $20,000 in cash, puts his daughter in a car on an IV, drives to the Mayo Clinic. He happens to be in the same hotel as me, tells me the story. His daughter had a cyst on the back side of the kidney, which was leaking too much whatever into whatever. They go in there with a little laser beam thing, and they stitch it up. His daughter's fine. So you tell me that health care isn't there to depopulate America? You tell me that that's not the fact, and you're going to have a serious disagreement with me. And you don't think I have rage on this issue? I have a phenomenal amount of rage on bad health care. And when you reduce health care and you lower the quality of the world's greatest health care system, I mean, have you been to the Mayo Clinic, Doug, Joe? Have you ever been there? Hopefully you haven't.
No.
Yeah. It's just phenomenal. There's like 26,000 nurses alone that work there. In one of the buildings, it was like just hundreds of miles of corridors. And I swear I walked them all. In the middle of these massive hospital systems, you got these beautiful churches built as shrines where people that are crushed worldwide come and pray. You got suites at the top of these hospitals. They're 8,000 square foot rooms where Saudis come in on private jets. I was there at the oh my goodness, my ignorance from Wayland High School in Michigan is going to come forward. I can only say that we had 31 snow days in 1980 because of Mount St. Helens. The Dalai, he was there. The Dalai Lama was there because he was poisoned, and no one could fix him, but the Mayo Clinic cured him and detoxed him. So I'm very passionate about healthcare, but on the prayer walk, when you walk the property and you come before God and you say, this is all I am, okay? And for some reason, I write a couple great creative books, and they were a lot of fun, and it brought me a lot of joy. Yet this book, Yet the Dead Sea Souls, where the oceans are filled with dead Christians. Christians frozen so solid that their arms and rigor mortis are only holding up the one thing that is precious to them, a decrepit, ragged Bible that these people have read from cover to cover since their youth. And that image and these images of one sailboat with these near-dead people fleeing evil, which is hunting them down, because that is what evil does. It wants chaos. It hates life. It hates women who produce life. It hates children because it's innocent about life. Evil hates it all. It hates agents who think for themselves. It wants dependents. It wants victims. It wants chaos. And if you want a perfect picture of evil from a literary standpoint, most people in your audience are already saying, oh, the Joker and Batman. You know, I'm an agent of chaos. They don't have any big fancy plans. Matter of fact, what's his favorite things he wants? He burns the money. He burns the town. He only likes, guns and dynamite. And you know what they have in common? There you have it. They're both cheap. And you don't think this is a very fragile country where we have rampant trouble? It only takes a very few cheap items in the hands of very evil to do tremendous damage and pull back the veneer of civilization. How are you doing on break? How are you guys doing on break?
We're coming up here in a few minutes. I just want to say you've had a personal walk that's been, to say it's been challenging is would be an understatement, certainly. And I understand too when you've got a loved one, especially a spouse that you've got to tend to. Whether it's a Mayo Clinic or some other specialty hospital, I fully understand that. Lived it long ago, a lifetime ago. But having said that, it almost seems like, if I'm hearing this correctly, out of your experiences, out of everything you've been through, the gut-wrenching heartache and the massive oppressive bills, and then at the same time watching the very system upon which you have been relying being decimated by a bunch of bureaucrats inside the Potomac, inside the Beltway, with some sort of Potomac fever, basically just subjugating us to a much lesser healthcare system. And it just seems like, so this is very personal to you, and from that, if and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like all of your personal experiences basically were building blocks for your writing. This, in particular, the Dead Sea Souls. Is that a fair statement?
It really is a fair statement, because the brokenness hit me, and then my editor came to me, and he says, hey, now that you taste that life sucks, go write some good books. You write plenty of bad books for me. Go write some good books, because life is hard, and it's not always hunky-dory. And, therefore my books deal with tough topics. I write really gritty novels. I write books on criminal sexual conduct. I write books on hate and racism. And I'm talking pure hate and pure racism, not this horse crap you see on TV. A hatred that hates a people group before they're born. But that's racism, okay? Margaret Sanger racism. We have to be very quiet, and it's almost a direct quote. We have to be very quiet about Planned Parenthood. We don't want the Negro population to know that we're genociding them, okay? And that's hatred of a people group before they're born. And who speaks against it? Well, that's right, Bill Cosby, Ben Carson, and, some of these great leaders. The one you're having on, his name's Manning. Who speaks against that? Is these powerful black leaders, and what happens when they do? They're ostracized, or they're politically dumbed down, or the war goes against them. And it's just,
I got to ask you too about. I really got to ask you about Bill Cosby. 40 years over the course of 40 years. Now we're seeing all these people come out and start saying, well, he raped me, or he drugged me and then raped me, or he drugged me twice and raped me 5 times, and nobody. To me, from an investigative point of view, look, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there, but I just, He could have done all of that and more. He could have been spanking puppies and kittens in his basement. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is the timing, especially with what we see in Ferguson and everything going on, is certainly suspect to me. And I have to wonder.
Exactly. All we know that Bill Cosby has always been an icon of honor. He used humor. He's a moral man. He's always been an icon of what anybody in America can be. You know, even in the movie The Cosby Show, where he was involved in the writing of that extensively, you know, none of the friends wanted to be with him because all the Cosby kids were rich. And then what's the next narrative? Hey, we work for our money. Our money doesn't work for us. Well, he's laying down the bedrock of wealth. They're not rich. They're just middle class. Okay, a doctor is middle class, except in Michigan under Jennifer Granholm, where she wanted to tax the crap out of all of them. You know, and thank goodness she's gone. And maybe I can't even believe I mentioned her name. But the doctor class is all of a sudden being reduced to a middle class, and that's a beautiful thing, because they don't do it for the money. Most of them, you know, there's always a few, but they do it because they care about healing people. And I think Cosby grabbed that. And here's the kicker, and this is why news in 3D is so important to your audience, and I think your audience already knows what I'm going to say. It started when he spoke against abortion. He was a black man who spoke against abortion. And I don't even think he was that aggressive. He was not talking like the Black Genocide documentary or anything like that. He just spoke against it. And let me tell you, you know, all hell follows. So when you speak into chaos, all hell follows. And in comes this. And all I'm saying is this. One of the presidential runners who ran with Godfather's Pizza, and his name slips me because that's just how I am. Sometimes my brain works, and sometimes it doesn't. You know, but
Herman King.
I do this. Yes, Herman King. And all of a sudden, women come out, and all of a sudden, he's a womanizer. And all of a sudden, when all the dust settles, oh, well, it just so happens that 3 of these women happen to be in the same apartment building as Rahm Emanuel. Huh, imagine that. And all of them, for some reason, were financially tied to the business dealings of Rahm Emanuel. And that's back when he wasn't the mayor or whatever he is now. He actually is. But, okay, all I'm saying is this. I don't like it. And if Herman King was a womanizer and he did these terrible things of oppression, which is a cruelty that women do not heal from overnight, the timing is awful, you know. But when one victim is abused and it comes out, it is natural for other oppressed to come out into the light as they get courage by this. At the same time, it doesn't pass a smell test, as Paul Craig Roberts would say. And the Cosby thing doesn't pass the smell test. There is no way in the world he's ever going to get a platform on the mainstream media to say anything. And if he does get a platform, they're going to edit the hell out of it and make it look like
tell you. You know what, Doug? I got to tell you, I've been accused of different things here and there. Nothing to the extent, obviously, of what Bill Cosby has, but of misrepresenting certain things. And in every case, no matter what you do, if you would talk to an attorney, for example, the attorney will tell you. And folks, look, I've been down this road before. No matter what you do, the first words out of your mouth, I mean, as soon as you open your mouth, you lose. You know, if you attempt to defend yourself, you'll lose. And you could be as white as the driven snow, pure as the driven snow, but you just lose. And so those who think, for example, Bill Cosby, when he shakes his head and says, I'm not going to talk about that, or I can't talk about that, there's a reason for that, because no matter what he says, it's going to be twisted, turned, flipped, and then shoved right up, you know, where the sun don't shine. and used against him, regardless of what he would say. So you're exactly correct. And having worked in the investigative field for 28 years, I can tell you that no attorney worth his salt is going to make any statement. They're going to tell you to shut up, be quiet. Doesn't matter if you're guilty, innocent, whatever, or if you did it or didn't do it. You just be quiet, because the second you open your mouth, you're just. Unfortunately, that's the way the system works here in this country. We're up against the top of the hour, Joe. So, Doug, hang loose there for a sec.
Yeah, with that, we'll take our top of the hour break. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this eve of Thanksgiving, this Wednesday, November 26, 2014, with our guest, Douglas K. Pearson. He is an author of many books. His latest, Dead Sea Souls. Go to the website, Mass Pole Barn, and check out the free literature he has made available for us for tonight's show. Well, ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, November 26, 2014, on the eve of this Thanksgiving. We are joined by author Douglas K. Pearson. His website, douglaskpearson.com. You can find his latest book, Dead Sea Souls, as well as the rest of his books available there at douglaskpearson.com. Also, for tonight's show, he has been kind enough to set up a website, masspolebarn.com, where listeners to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report can receive these resources or books for free download, such as Dead Sea Souls and several others that we're going to get into, such as Storm Crash, Journey, and Virus, getting into the fear that has gripped the church. And with that, I'm going to bring back Mr. Pearson, and welcome back to the show. And we can go here into the second hour anywhere you want to take us, Mr. Pearson.
Well, it's good to be back, and I actually had a chance to get a drink of water because, I know I can really unload on an audience, but I thank your audience ahead of time. I thank their wisdom and how they called in at various times to help and put very direct questions out there. So that was good. Had a chance to get a drink of water, but by all means, if I start ranting and losing focus, just interrupt me and say, hey, can you switch topic, man, because you're losing us. But I do know this. In the book, The Dead Sea Souls, I had snakes. They were there. They were in the water. The Dutch did it for some reason. They're genetically modified organisms that wiped out the sea. And they were unedible. They were toxic. And then another group of scientists let snakes go on land. And I had large snakes, but I knew at the time, I'm writing about snakes, they're just symbols of evil. It's nothing personal. It's the oldest symbol of evil in the world, and I used snakes. But realistically, the snakes, they can do things that other animals can't. And when I was tuning into your show a few days ago, and you talked about another author who had the blood snake and the Ebola, and then you have massive people come out who have massive backgrounds in genetics and in virus and in medicine and in corruption and being watchdogs over corruption and in inoculations and in forced immunizations. There's so many signs outside our local pharmacies about immunization for this and that. If you put them all together, you could make a little cartoon book like they did in the old days of Disney. I bet there's 9 or 10 different immunizations they want any average American to get. And they're scaring the death out of the people. They're using fear. They're showing, men with their skin rotted off with shingles now and things like that. Shingles is a bad thing. You don't want to get it, but, it's not going to kill you last time I checked. But the combination of genetics, genetic altering, and snakes was foundational in the book. And when Ebola comes on the scene and you study it and you watch hundreds of articles coming out on Ebola, thousands of articles a week, journalists doing a fantastic job, overseas journalists doing a fantastic job, BBC and things like that. And then all of a sudden, it just stops. And I'm talking if Alvin Conway on the Extinction Protocol can't find an article on Ebola, it ain't out there. And I'm just thinking, who and what kind of media conglomerate did the crazy Clinton set up that shuts down a story? And, I followed Ebola because it's Ebola. It's a level 4 virus with no cure. You don't just chug a gallon of water and get over it. I followed Ebola when it started breaking out. I thought it broke out about this time last year, Thanksgiving. I think I saw my first notes on it. And I talk about that in one of my books on virus. One of my friends, I go to a soccer game with a soccer mom. She used to work at the CDC, so her and I are always wigging out on anything that burps weird coming out of Africa or wherever. Well, when it doesn't pass the smell test in terms of when it came stateside, and all of these news stories start spinning off, and all of these powerful figures start coming out in the alternative media only, like you guys, like Steve Quayle, like Paul Craig Roberts, and they're making statements like, something's wrong here. A level 4 in a controlled environment doesn't just go away. It multiplies exponentially. That's what it does. It breeds, it goes airborne in cold weather, it kills, and there is no cure. And you can kiss your butt goodbye. Well, they started releasing the numbers, remember, back Christmas, and then February, then March. Well, all you got to do is count the numbers one week and then make a simple logarithm for the next week, and you can notice that it doesn't go down, ever. It cannot go down when it's in a populated sentence or in a populated environment. In the novel, the snakes, they don't stop. They're always going forward. The creeps spliced their DNA with the antifreeze gene. They didn't freeze in winter. They got into the sewers. That's all they did is eat and get bigger and then crap out the crystallized bones of the tortured people. That's what evil does. It releases things just for the sport of watching the damage path. And now all of a sudden with Ebola, when they, you know what, if it's turved or whatever, but the fact that there's been a total media blackout on it, I don't like that. And, I'm a parent. I got children. We're in a global culture. Our children travel. It's a small world. And from a family perspective and being involved in poor health and watching this come upon a healthcare system that, by definition, is, how do you saw it? It has oversight and policies being applied to it that are impossible to implement. It's got bureaucracy. And it is a fascinating thing to watch play out. Now, is it just me, and am I just looking in the wrong places, Doug and Joe, or has that gone weird?
Oh, no. And Joe and I will be the first ones to admit. I mean, we had Steve Quayle, Derek, and Sharon Gilbert. Sharon, of course, is a microbiologist, talking about the oddities of the Ebola virus disease, as it's called now, EVD. But you're right with respect to the media blackout. And personally, what we're looking at here from our perspective is it's going to come back with a vengeance. What we're seeing, I believe, and I talked to Steve Quayle about this and Sharon Gilbert, and we're not seeing true Ebola. We're seeing some sort of mutation of Ebola, perhaps created, I don't know, maybe created in a laboratory, but watch out for the beginning of 2015, we suspect, and we could be wrong about this, it might be later, but at some point, we're going to see a resurgence of this, and of course, isn't it convenient, like you spoke of, Doug, the healthcare system, isn't it convenient that we're looking at this cloud God-given, whether they know it or not, strategy of overwhelming not just, look, it's just not a destruction of our healthcare system, 1/6 of our economy. It's an overwhelming of our healthcare system, not just with this Ebola virus disease that is latent right now, soon to perhaps become, like the snakes you described, more prevalent, but also with this blanket, and I don't care what they call it, it's blanket amnesty, illegal to its core, and how that's going to overwhelm the system, as well as the enterovirus 68. We don't hear a doggone thing about the enterovirus 68 that's causing polio-like symptoms children all across the United States. I mean, what's up with that? You know?
These are interesting times, and we know history repeats itself, and we know that you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality. And we know that in, like, the Diary of Anne Frank, which, just for the record, readers, you should just pick that up and flip through it again, and you will be very disturbed. In the Diary of Anne Frank, she basically is talking about what's legal and what's illegal, and she doesn't know it's illegal to go to the cinema here, it's illegal to be at the dark here, it's illegal to ride a bike there, and she just flipping. She's a little kid writing in her journal. Well, I don't know. Now it's like everything we do. In other words, she's talking about contractions. And the Nazi Party governed by crisis, and therefore they were always contracting and backing off, then contracting and backing off. And let me tell you, something's in the birth canal audience, and you better understand what's in the birth canal. And you better, and we all better, continually make our peace with God, equip ourselves, know Scripture. To be ignorant is to perish. And we need to have that peace, because there's a lot of scare out there. Because let me tell you, just look at the birth canal in America right now. Look at the contractions. Ebola, massive Ebola. 23 plus hours on mainstream media, pushing. They back off. Ebola. Now it's amnesty. Within a week, executive action, impeach the president, interviewing the radicals. It's the emancipation of proclamation, according to Nancy Pelosi. And of course, I wrote that in writing 6 years ago, because when you listen to a man, he will tell you his bad intentions. That's what pride does. And this president is consistent in telling people his bad intentions. From a writing standpoint, it's called foreshadow. And this president is a master. His speechwriters are masters at foreshadow. And maybe it's intentional. I personally think it is. But when you got Ebola one week, you got amnesty the next week, you got Ferguson, and you have people like Rick Wallace who have been saying from day one, and they have been saying, so many of our audience, I've repeated this, have been saying that this moment, when there's a lame duck, out with the old, the new haven't been sworn in, this is a fragile moment. When you have, as Charles Krauthammer of Fox News said, and I listen to him because I respect his audience, our worst fears are materializing. We have an ideologue in the office. That's a direct quote.
Doug, and I totally agree with you on this, but I've been pushing this point heavily for the last several weeks, whether it be Charles Krauthammer, and I don't know what his position was before, or Britt Hume or Chris Wallace, that's on the right, of course, and Laura Ingraham, those people who are peers, regular panelists, we'll say, on Fox News. What bothers me the most, Doug, about the conservatives, and especially the Christian conservatives, is, and excuse me for being very direct and very, not vulgar, but coarse, crass on this, they didn't give a damn about the origins, about the constitutional eligibility, about the background, about the pedigree of this renegade in chief that we have in office. They never said word one, and if anyone did say anything about the origins of this community organizer, this lawless one that we've got occupying illegally the Oval Office, whose name we don't even know for sure, legal name that is, we were marginalized. We were made to look like kooks and idiots and some sort of two-headed monsters out there, racist bigots. Yet we're seeing right now, and I got to tell you, my friend, lame duck. No, we've got a caged lion that's wounded and about ready to take some additional strikes at us. But that's just my view. I had to get that out of my system, buddy.
Well, we do have opinion, but ironically, there's a lot of opinions out there that are leaning heavily towards truth. And there's a lot of statements that are speculation that are leaning a little bit more towards fact. And we all want to get towards truth, and we want to get towards fact. And I have opinions as much as the next person. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of pissed at the NFL for firing Bob Seger because he had an opinion about a president. And next thing you know, he's not doing the Monday night intro. And, personally, I don't like the Communist News Network or the Commercial News Network any more than the next guy. And I must just say this right out. I hope I'm good off topic. I'm kind of happy for them because they worked so hard, President too, in hand on programming the people to riot, and they're making so much money right now. I think it's probably about $1 million every 7 minutes that CNN is raking in right now because they created such a fantastic organization. And you don't think our president can't organize a community? He's doing it nationwide. But back with Bob Seger having an opinion. Remember Lou Dobbs on the passport or on the birth certificate issue?
Oh, yeah.
He's been at CNN since the beginning. This is Lou Dobbs. And all of a sudden he comes out, well, it'd be a lot easier if they just produced the darn thing. And, would they wait 16 seconds before they fired him? Okay? And you start to set a precedent that if you speak against them, you're fired. Now, at the same time, hey, reap the whirlwind. Quit being a zombie and speak your mind. If you're a columnist, speak your mind. But they were dead quiet. And how many hours did it take the individual person to try to even begin to understand who this man was in our office? I mean, again, I got a lot of stress in my life. My wife's in bad health. I have a computer. I got a big fancy education. I can dig and dig and dig. I'm like a rodent when I get on something. And I didn't even know where to start. And I read his book, Dreams of My Father. And, you get that word Frank Marshall Davis. Well, who in the heck is Frank Marshall Davis, and why is he mentioned? Well, I think someone kind of screwed up to leave that in there. Oh, that's right. There's 56,000 pages on Frank Marshall Davis in the FBI record. Okay, then you start digging into Chicago. Then you start digging into Weather Underground. Oh, that's right. Agent Larry Granthrow. He's a patriot. I think they murdered him. That's just my personal opinion. May he rest in peace.
I've heard that, by the way.
26,000 pages. 26,000 pages on the Weather Underground, okay? And what does the conclusion of this, what is his synthesis? What is his truth, not just opinion? What does he think the fact is? 50% of our country can be taught to be collaborators if you throw enough money at them. 25%, they're going to go with whatever. But that other 25%, not so lucky. Joe, were you saying something?
Well, I just wanted to say Larry Grafwalt, who worked with the FBI in infiltrating the Weather Underground, was a great friend of the show. Unfortunately, passed away last year, but beforehand was a guest several times and explained to us in many different times, in many different ways, how they planned on doing this and how, a portion of the population would be open to re-education, and then those that weren't would have to be murdered because of their lack of open-mindedness to the new system that was going to be introduced.
Yeah, and I got to say this, Doug, and listeners, Larry and I talked off air and several times, and this in the weeks before he died, we were actually making plans, and I'll say this again, people have heard me say this, perhaps not to this level of specificity, but we were making plans of approaching or cornering Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn face to face, and this would be a first time on camera, on video, or video and audio of Larry Grothwell cornering Bill Ayers, and we were going to travel. I told him, I said, "Look, I'll pick you up, buddy. And we got your back, and you just go up there and we'll film it." And it wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't 2 weeks later that we got the news that he was found dead in his apartment. But, wow.
And may he rest in peace, and may he died of natural causes. This we know, but we also know this: the history books in 50 years. May the humility and the fortitude of the Christian base in America, through humility and prayer and being at peace, be bold. And if evil falls, because evil is just seasonal, Jezebels come and Jezebels go. They get thrown out the windows and they get licked up by dogs. But what Jezebel did is she attacked the element of youth in their culture, and through Moloch worship crashed the birth record and crashed the population. And evil matures, and evil destroys itself. It's what it does, and that's why God is just. He allows the free will of evil to mature, so he hears all the evidence, and then he can bring about his judgment. But in 50 years, Larry, Andrew Breitbart, Tom Clancy, Michael Hastings, this list could be extensive, because I don't even think they started the killing fields yet. And the Patriots are going to have to realize, hey, you know what? This isn't a novel anymore, Clancy. You might have realized. We're working on something a little bit bigger. We are in a position where we don't know this man. We don't know the people behind him. I do know this. It's been 50 years since John F. Kennedy was killed. It appears, for all practicality, that this was a coup attempt, because who benefited and who was he after? And you have to say the CIA went absolutely ape after he died, led by LBJ, and who made all the money and who benefited, and that is a very disturbing thing. And when they didn't let Jackie Kennedy on that plane, that individual stopped her from being and fulfilling a role of honor, and he rubbed her nose in her husband's assassination. That is a coup. And it appears, and may history judge them, but it appears that smells bad of the CIA. And I'm not saying the CIA as an entity is bad. I'm saying there's a fifth column of power that has risen to do horrible atrocities. They've linked with maybe powerful people or powerful businesses. They have a plan. It seems to be they want to depopulate the planet. They want to reduce it. The Guidestones are testament to this. They have shouted it from the rooftops. They said it in their seminaries. They whisper it off their back decks. They laugh about it in their jokes. And evil is consistent. It wants chaos, and it hates life. God is life. God is truth. Evil is lies. And the narrative of the Dead Sea Souls encapsulates, as best I could, I just recorded what evil men scheme to do. And God seems to, he's in control, and he hasn't even played his cards yet. I'm really kind of excited about that. But evil seems to need that human element. Satanic evil, which is pure chaos, needs the scheming factor of evil men. It seems like evil men need, because they have this human intelligence, this creative destruction. They're creative in how they think about how to destroy things. And once that union between evil men and satanic evil culminated in the Dead Sea Souls, all bets are off. And again, I use symbols because I just wrote what I saw. I talked to zombies. I didn't even know that they were representative of a consumer-based society that collapsed. I didn't even know that the massive movies and the massive move of zombies would come to rise, like the TV shows on AMC and stuff like that, The Walking Dead. But I was fascinated in the book to see, I mean, seriously, zombies walking out of the ocean in Africa, zombie women and killing the African men for sexual oppression for hundreds of thousands of years or whatever. I mean, seriously, this is what I'm writing about, yet it was there. I wrote about it, and let me tell you, it's a very disturbing tale. And readers, listeners of Hagmann, make your peace with God, but when you go into this book, see it as one that will equip you for a very disturbing future. A disturbing future, but one that is in writing by God that is conclusive. It will happen. It may happen in our lifetime. For 2,000 years, the prophets were so then people have been forecasting that it's going to happen in their generation, and they've been wrong. But that doesn't mean this huge random group of people are wrong right now. And that is what is more alarming. I think, Joe and Doug, you see this more than anybody else. This random group of people who wrote random things, who do not work or know each other, yet have a unity in theme that they want to equip the church for difficult times. The difficult times are there. The leaders smell wrong. They have very questionable histories. The fifth column of power has seemed to put them in charge. There are things in three-dimensional that don't smell right, like last October and when the nuclear bomb went off the East Coast. You know, who took the fall? A couple of honorable men on ships. It sounds like, from what I tried to dig up, can't verify that the nuke was a dud. There's just a test, but the fifth column put it there. They fire it, and I have the exact details about this event in my book, Crash. It's under Man versus Man, and it's a nuclear attack. And the details and the names of the rear admirals in charge are there, how they testified before Congress, and how they were fired. For what? They couldn't inspect the nuke, so they sent the sucker out to sea. Okay? And it's like, oh, it blew 520 miles off the South Carolina coast, so obviously that's a long... Well, what is that in... what's a nuke travel at? You know, Mach 80? You know, it's only like 4.5 seconds off, and that was disturbing to me. But what was more disturbing, and this is why if your readers can continue to look at things three-dimensionally, it's so huge. What was more disturbing was the media. Remember back last October? Everything was nuclear. Nuclear this, nuclear that. Fukushima, nuclear. All the TV shows were nuclear. You know, the media was pushing it. Where was the money going? Oh, that's right, Iran, nuclear. Oh, North Korea, they're launching missiles. You know, and all of this, all of a sudden, is massive into this nuclear mess that was imminent. Red Dawn, 1 second after, you know, TV's revolution, and then the money was behind it between, you know, that. And then Syria. Of course, Syria was nuclear. You know, I didn't know Syria was nuclear. I thought Syria was having about, 40,000 people die a day from starvation. But now they're a nuclear powerhouse. And Lindsey Graham, I don't know, I'm the head of the section on whatever his fancy role was, and for some reason they're talking about a nuclear threat from Syria. South Carolina sending up FEMA camps, FEMA sending MREs to all the schools. It was just a fascinating display. The military was in that fifth column of power right there, and that's where evil seems to want to leverage the free will of evil men who can scheme to make it have its accomplishment in chaos. And I tell you right now, America, that grid goes down, we're down, and we will not get back up. Okay, if the average meal in America travels 1,400 miles before it's eaten, it's pretty safe to say that you need to have shelf supply of food. You need to have boxes and boxes of Bibles to read by candlelight. You need to have water and filtration. And this is just the stuff that for some reason this one dad did with his little kids on a sailboat in 2004. I mean, they were eating dog food, for Pete's sake. He was loading dog food on a boat, 55-gallon drums. So how come? Because towards the end, it was all he could afford. And in the book, through comic relief, the lady who survived a cannibalism experience, and through starvation, she was hearing the hog crunch her mother's bones in Mrs. Visser's Sunday school class where she was penned in for being a Christian, and she collapses on the boat, and she says, I was so starved that I wanted to eat my mother. And that type of tone, when that hit me on chapter 4 or chapter 6, and all of a sudden it's like, what is happening to my imagination? Well, my imagination, I believe, was hijacked, and I didn't really have the fortitude or the moral fortitude to actually say that at the time, because I didn't know. So I went through a period of about 7 years of silence where I did my prayer walk, I did my reading, I did my thinking, I got my alone time, I tried to handle my stress. And if you were with me last hour when I talked about the prayer walk, you noticed that I got pretty emotional right there. And I was losing it when I was talking about carving crosses into the trees and coming before an Almighty and saying, what are you doing? I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. I'm in a wet paper bag. I'm in a garage with the door shut with a leaf blower trying to clean it. What are you doing? And our pastors at our church would just simply say, honor your wife, honor God, do as best you can with your kids, and all will work out. But stay with the basics. And that is why I thank God so much for the suffering of an elder population. You know, I didn't even know our senior pastor had a wife who had, oh my gosh, hundreds of surgeries with diabetes. And I didn't even know that he was a primary care provider where most of his energy went to serving his wife. I didn't even know he could still have a sense of humor when she tried on a pair of shoes at Kohl's. And then it came time for her to go, and the keys, they couldn't find the keys, but they were in her shoe, and she was walking, and the keys were jamming themselves right into her because she didn't have any feeling. And how he had to get home and pull the keys out of his wife's foot and try to laugh about it. I didn't even know there was other people like that. But when he came to me and he says, you're being prayed for, Doug, you are being prayed for daily, that you will keep the fight, that a day will come where you will use your suffering and your theology of brokenness to tell America that they have hope, that it's there, that you can have peace, okay? Because let me tell you, when a woman goes through massive amounts of surgeries and massive amounts of infections and massive amounts of narcotics to get through this, it just doesn't end there. You have massive amounts of psychological problems, okay? You got to detox. You got post-trauma issues. And, you know, and every time what killed us was every time in Michigan, where we get one thing under control, like off narcotics, and then the wound would open up, and then you'd have the wound closed, and then you'd have to deal with another thing. So what we did is we went to the Mayo Clinic and said, we can't get a good detox in Michigan because we got an open wound. And, of course, we had like 5,000 surgeries. So then you have blood infections at like MRSA, where you can't just be in a detox clinic, you know. So they had to set up a psychological ward with a psychiatrist. They had to set up a detox ward with great doctors for dechemicalizing my wife. And they had to set up, what's the other big one? The wound. So you have to have top surgeons because they're opening the wound and cleansing it all the time. So that was a fascinating journey. And God is faithful. And he will be faithful in the future. And he is good all the time. Because that. Now, that was an interesting. Are you coming on a break, Doug, or how are we doing on time? But that all built into a faith testimony in my novels.
It's interesting, and we're okay on time here. We'll let you know, but it's interesting how your life experiences, your personal experiences with your wife's experiences, how all of this, you're living this, and then your book, there's this overlay and this intertwining with your novel, and it grows outward, and people might be listening to this, and folks, I urge you to listen to this program more than one time to get the full effect of this, to get the full understanding of what Douglas K. Pearson is talking about. And I would urge you to get his books so you can follow along and understand what he's talking about. And yeah, I mean, this all, I got to tell you, man, I mean, you and your wife have been through it, and of course your kids, but those people yet to go through the suffering that is yet to come from the evil people out there, from the evil agendas. I mean, people, you know what, Doug, I got to tell you, people are going to be, even the strongest of Christians, I believe, are going to be surprised. It's going to take the wind out of them. And wow, you know, yeah.
And when you look at the nature of suffering and how other countries, you know, they're praying for us. And here we have Persecution Sunday in Michigan. And, you know, we show a quick video of Persecution Sunday, and we're so thankful to live in a country that's free. And it's like, listen, our pastor, thank goodness, he had the guts to say, all right, do you think America's strong? And I'm summarizing here. He goes, we get shut down with a snowstorm. Okay? Now, that means something to me when a pastor will say, okay, snowstorms cancel church across Michigan. And you don't believe so? Next time, go to your news station and hit cancellations. Next time there's Wednesday night and there's little flurries on the ground. And you see 90% of the church is closed. That means something. I went through Hurricane Andrew as a kid. So I was a kid teaching down in a Christian school in Florida Keys, Island Christian School. And Hurricane Andrew, oh my goodness, what a monster. You know, everybody thought it was going to turn, all the media. And Joel Norcross, I think he's the only one who said, and I remember hearing him say this, a storm this big doesn't listen to computer models. People, you run, you evacuate now. And, of course, he's one of the chief guys on the Weather Channel right now because he saved lives. I think he saved thousands of lives. But I was in the relief effort in Hurricane Andrew, and two stories are remarkable, and they're in the book, Storm. If you're right there, you can read about it if you don't believe me. Right there on masspolebarn.com. It's the first one. Hurricane Andrew, we got a bunch of water. We're down in the Florida Keys, which missed the storm by 16 miles. Otherwise, they'd all be dead. The church is loading up all this water, and Carl Pearson, Tony Hammond, and the pillars there, they're loading in a bunch of guns. And it's like, you know, how old was I? I graduated from graduate school in, I don't know, 88 or something, 90, got married in 91, storm hit. Man, we were young. And you know, I didn't understand anything. Just like, what are you going to do? Shoot the people you're trying to help? And we get up to Homestead, and let me tell you, you could see for 20 miles in each direction. And you think that's an exaggeration. You stand on the roof of a bus in Homestead, you could see the Atlantic Ocean. And there wasn't a leaf or a tree that was there. And there were just people crawling out that it looked like they just are on a different planet. And this was a few days after, and it is dangerous. But it was a Sunday or a Wednesday we were doing this. And we go by this concrete slab that used to be a church. And there's a handful of the people, the most disheveled, oh my gosh, they were just a catastrophe of a group of people. The women had bonnets on their head. I remember that. And a pastor was pushing the mud off a cardboard rectangle thing that he was using as a podium, and he's preaching the sermon to this church. And it was a Mennonite church, I believe. And they're just having church. Okay, now, Doug and Joe, you've seen Hurricane Katrina. You've seen Sandy. But you want to know the biggest uncovered story? And there's, if you want to take, I think there's even a picture of it circulating on the internet. Some photographer was there, and he took a picture of these people worshiping God, business as usual. Okay, oh, we had a Category $40 billion storm, 285-mile-an-hour gust come through. Okay, entire migrant camps are gone.
This is, by the way, this is back in August 1992, the costliest storm in the history of the United States.
At that time,
so,
right? It bankrupts entire insurance agency. I believe State Farm got bought out by the federal government back then, or bailed out. And all their State Farm records, I think, are now access to by the government. So the government loves to buy out stuff like that because they can learn all the dirt on you. But having said that, the point being is that some people get it. They have the moral spine, and they get it. And we have roughly, I would say, 70 million Americans who I think get it. But we got to get it more. We got to pound in our head that the time is very short. There has to be an urgency. The birth contractions are now spinning at a weekly cycle. I mean, does anybody understand that? If ISIS is the next contraction, and let's just say, Black Friday, where the people are kind of lined up as cattle anyways, and they kill each other anyways because they're always getting crushed in doors and stampeded, and it's a hobby, and it's fun, and it's commercial at its best, and it's a zombie apocalypse, and I'm not going to argue with it. It's not even a metaphor. You fire something that's cheap, like the Joker said in Batman, like guns and bullets and dynamite. You fire something cheap behind a crowd of 10 or 15,000 people, and you collapse the shopping day of the year, the busiest one. It just makes you wonder if that's a contraction that's coming our way, because it would fit a lot of models in the financial circuit. It would fit the model of, a bank holiday on Monday, or a bail-in. The stock market's great. That managed to pop out today. The stock market's doing just great. Well, if Dr. Jim Garrow, former head of the CIA, during the mess with Iran, if he's right in his testimony that random sheriff or the random border patrol agent picked a random truck because a random cowboy had a crooked cowboy hat, and they stop them because cowboys don't wear their hats crooked, and you can listen to Jim Garrow's testimony, and they open up and back, and there's 4 Stinger missiles out of Benghazi, radar locking Stinger missiles. I'm not the brightest, cookie in the freezer, but you have got to understand that that's an expensive weapon. And how many thousands were stolen out of Benghazi? I heard numbers up to 15,000. Let's just say that's a 90% exaggeration. But I know how to read. I know how to read Charlie Wilson's War. I know how to watch a movie about Tom Hanks. I know how a Stinger missile, for every $30,000 investment, it took down a $30 million MiG. And I can understand how a handful of people crashed the Soviet Union financially. And you think this is a model that's lost to the tides of time? You think there's not a bunch of ill-intent people with deep pockets that hate America, that want to depopulate people? They've said it. They've forecasted it. All I did was listen to it and put it into a novel, and now when I see it happening, I have a framework for understanding, because it's real. The contractions are real. Something's in the birth canal, America, and it's time to make our peace with God. Take what we know, apply it, and be at peace. Because it's nothing personal. We're just in a fight between God and Satan. It's been going on forever, and we're getting squeezed. And it's time to hold our breath and go underground maybe a little bit.
Interesting way that you put all of that, and I like the way you involved the Benghazi aspect. We've been looking at that for since it happened. The gun running, the weapons running, even the preparation, the training of the anti-Assad rebels, and it's amazing. Gajendra Singh wrote an article, now probably 4 years ago, about maybe not that long, about Syria and about the number of dead and what will happen, and we can expect Benghazi, or not Benghazi, but Syria, about Syria and about what will happen with Syria when that finally blows. The Americans have, in the West, has not taken its eyes off of Syria as a target. And folks, just last week we saw the 37-page House Intelligence Committee report on Benghazi come out. Their findings, I think there were 17 findings, maybe. Interesting number nonetheless, but bottom line, nobody did anything illegal, no one did anything unauthorized. Interesting parsing of words. With that, folks, we're up against it, and Doug, we're up against the top of the hour. Fascinating 2 hours so far. Definitely rehydrate there. We need you. This is engaging, folks. Listening to the
Back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final hour of this Wednesday, November 26th edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Our guest today is Douglas K. Pearson. Go to his website at douglaskpearson.com. Also, you can go to masspolebarn.com, where he has set up a website specifically for Hagmann and Hagmann listeners to download and to read the information that he has published for free. And he has actually set up a part donation if for those who have the ability to give, that he wants to offer to our show, and we can't thank him enough for that. Mr. Pearson, I'm going to open this segment up with a question from a listener. And I know you touched on this a little bit, the first part of this question. So if you could reiterate this, what specific path did you travel on your awakening? And also, do you feel conviction or have an opinion as to whether the United States is Babylon? And if so, should we flee her? That question is from John.
Well, John, that's a great question, and fleeing is appropriate. If you don't run for your life, you will die. We're told to flee in front of hurricanes. We're told to evacuate. I'd be meeting my mass pole barn. I have a small group of trusted men, and one is looking at leaving the country. And I probably shouldn't have said that in front of a vast audience, but it's common sense. Every other person's looking at it. The antithesis of that is stand and fight. And I do know this. Once you leave, you are a refugee. And a refugee has lost some status. And that might be something to think about. I do know that I fled one job in my life. I was a youth pastor. I ran an organization, Marathon, Florida, an ecumenical organization with all the churches to help at-risk teenagers. And it was a great job. It was great job security. I mean, imagine being a at-risk advisor in the Florida Keys of pastoral. And the attack was phenomenal, the spiritual attack. I'm talking satanic circles close to your home being set up and things like that. And it was a fascinating job because you're confronting evil on a daily basis. And there's a phrase that when you stand and fight, whatever you ask in the name of the Father God, He will grant you. And I'm telling you that a godly man or a godly woman in the face of great turmoil can ask things of God with confidence, because the last 72 things you asked God for have happened. And I'm talking healing, miracles, beating drug addiction, overcoming criminal sexual conduct, overcoming addiction, surviving overdose, reuniting with parents, And the stories go on and on and on of healing and miracles. And with the darkness comes the light. And I lost my courage, actually, in that job, and I left. I fled. And I lost my reality. And your audience can understand this if they understand Francis Schaeffer, that when a Christian becomes arrogant, they do things on their own power. And they say God is working through them rather than they are working through God. And that's a weakness, and we're not strong enough for that burden. Therefore, every time a person uses their own strength, and I say this because this has happened to me, if you use your own strength, you're a legalist. And when you're a legalist, you lose your energy. And when you lose your energy, it's like in any evacuation drill or a bug-out drill that American Survival preaches about. When you lose your energy, you lose your reality. You make dumb decisions. You put others at risk. And I became a legalist. I disrespected my wife in public once because she wasn't mature enough to handle the power of the pulpit and all this horse crap that legalists talk about. So to my shame, I left. Now, I did have the Holy Spirit give me some insight to hire godly people and to make sure they were trained, and they're still there. And Shane Weeb and Lisa Porter are hopefully still doing the ministry of God, and Tony Hammond, and there's a lot of great people down there in the Florida Keys being a light, kind of in a weird place, you know. And I did leave, though, with my tail between my legs, and I became a less of a person because of it. Now, God forgives, time heals. That's just my 2 cents. I could take that shame, however, that I felt by making a bad decision at the man of the house, and the masculinity of it, and what it did to me when I made a bad decision, and how it emasculated me, and God allowed me to transform that into understanding emasculated characters and emasculated people, because I was one once upon a time. And through time, you know, I rebuilt. I personally am a stand and fight type guy. Now, my in-laws are Swiss. My wife is Swiss. I have no problem sending them there. They've been through wars before. They'll probably go through wars again. Half their mountains are underground and dug out, and they got enough food and energy for everybody. Matter of fact, during the great volcanoes, the last couple hundred years, where the years without darkness happened, and Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, and Mount Temporablos go high, and Les Miserables is there when, after the 30 years after the French Revolution, where 25% of the European continent is dying of starvation, or did die of starvation. 25% of a continent dead from starvation. Where did they go? They went to the Swiss, you know, a lot of them. And because the Swiss, they were preppers. I don't know, man, maybe it's because of the first Christian nation over there, and they understood that half their population got there after the Waldenses were persecuted out of the Catholic Church and ran for their lives up in the high Alps, and they figured out how to make it work, you know, with cows and cheese and chocolate. And so that was how I would look at the concept of standing and fighting, okay? Yet, you know, the Huguenot heritage and my heritage at times did flee. My in-laws were in France during the time of Bloody Mary, and we were in Paris with my kids last summer, 2 summers ago. And I remember standing at a bridge, and my son saying, "Wow, it's so beautiful." And again, my ignorance is here, but I think it was the Seine River. And yeah, we're looking down it, and there's a little plaque right there that reads, "Oh, this is," well, it wasn't there. I had to read in the textbook, but once upon a time it should have been there, and it should be there today. That when they barricaded the city and they massacred the Christians, they threw their bodies into that river, and there's a fjord about 8 miles downstream where there's a sharp bend, and that's where the bodies started stacking up, and they stacked up all the way into the city, and they released the prisoners to try to break up the logjam of human dead Christians, and plague came, and terrible things followed. My in-laws fled. Okay? That's the historical narrative. You cannot flee when the persecution is unstoppable and the church remains intact. Now, where do you run to today? Do you go to Argentina? Probably not the greatest decision. Where do you run to, and what's it going to do to you? Now, I have young children. So, yes, we have a plan to flee, but we do know that if we leave in Michigan and the people who left their homes in the Dead Sea Souls, in the cold, it doesn't work out very well. That's a true statement in the Hunger Games. Most will die of exposure, okay? And you get hypothermia quick. In Michigan right now, I just took a walk outside when I was talking to you. You probably sensed my voice was shivering during my last narrative. If you leave, or if evil attacks at the wrong time or the strategically correct time, you will die. And it doesn't take us to look too far back into history to realize that when Hitler sent his fleet north to attack Moscow, the Laptev seas froze in what we now call a polar vortex. The winds came off. It was 40 below with wind chill. And if the deep underscore history books, which seem to capture the truth, Hitler lost because God killed over 300,000 of those bastards on the northern front. England has a coin.
Yeah.
England has a coin commemorating an act of God for the victory. And Russia, well, you better think twice before you attack Russia.
Very well.
So I don't know where to run to. So stand and fight. You leave, exposure is your enemy, and you die quick with exposure. You leave, you're cheap. But think through. These are real decisions, and God will provide clear, crystal clear insight. Listen.
There it is. Yeah, I'm convinced. I haven't had what I would consider any type of divine instruction, and the way I see it playing out. And of course, this is subject to change based on what I'm instructed to do by my God. But I intend to. It may not be pretty. I might, I'm good for about 30 seconds. The rest I'm going to have to do from a lounge chair or from a chair. But I intend to fight it out, here. But it might not be pretty. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think there is any place really that you can run to. Now, there will be pockets of safety, obviously. Pockets of relative safety. But on the other hand, on a global basis, when everything does get to that point where we're in the tribulation with a capital T, there's no place you're going to run to that you're going to be able to hide from what's coming. So that's just my view.
Yeah, exactly. And during the last battles on Earth, just logically think this through in case you can't count. But I'm talking to a wise audience here, thank goodness. It takes a lot of relief. I can use 3-syllable words and things like that. The last battles, the numbers are so astounding, reaching into the millions. Well, when armies move like that, they devour everything. They devour every animal, every piece of moisture, everything green and beautiful. They devour people. In the book, my marching armies, every time they murdered a child or a woman, they cut the legs off and threw string around them and carried them around their neck so they could sustain themselves as they marched. And I kept thinking, the book is so dark that people are actually doing these things. And next thing I know, I never really heard that much about Vlad the Impaler. I remember reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I remember maybe there's a connection that the real monster of history. Well, that's a pretty disturbing thing when he was facing that monster army, the Muslim horde coming out, and he killed his own people. on stakes across the horizon. 30,000, 40,000 bodies on stakes, everything burned, everything charred. And when the invading horde saw that, and they saw this land, they were so disgusted that they turned back. And I think what we're looking at in the future, if the biblical narrative is right, and I read the Bible a couple times just for the record, and for some reason it's always the same. The wars are huge. Everything's going to be consumed. Every rock's going to be unturned. And the earth is going to be shaken. And I think I say it best when I say, dear Christian, have dignity and die with the valor of God. And I don't say that lightly, okay? Having faced death, having faced and buried people I love, having buried teenagers from suicide. I've seen my fair share, and I will see more. But there comes a point when you say to yourself, either it's right or it's wrong. And if it's right, it's time to equip ourselves and face our fate and die with the valor of God. In the book, The Dead Sea Souls, I have intellects in the church who do that. They stand in front of the firing squad. They wink at the viewer who actually becomes the narrator later on because she peed on herself. And she realized two things. One, it was normal to pee on yourself when you see an execution of Christians, and two, it was normal to see the execution of Christians. And both of them seemed blatantly unromantic. And that is interesting. I do know this. In the book, The Dead Sea Souls, the family was equipped. They had unlimited resources. They stocked their sailboat with thousands of pounds of food. They had water filters. They escaped. Yet, they were hunted and they were found. And the concept of evil, okay, just logically think it through from a historical narrative. When Glenn Beck starts talking about the Nazis here and that, what happened? Somehow or another, he ends up going to Israel, and I like Glenn Beck as much as the next guy. I kind of think that he had I always forget this guy's name. He ran in the election against Bush Sr. He was a very wealthy businessman. He was a shorter man.
Ross Perot?
Ross Perot. And everybody said, Ross Perot, why don't you run again? And he said, well, it kind of takes the fun out of it when they threaten to kill your wife and children. Glenn Beck, I wonder sometimes if he had that same narrative, especially when it came to his talking about FEMA camps, because something happened between 2 o'clock in the afternoon and 6 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, he's running the big story. At 6 o'clock, it's like, what FEMA camp? But the point being is that Hitler employed the Persians into Germany because they had the satanic hatred to hunt down Jews. And they came in by the tens of thousands. And they weren't even in it for the money. I mean, Anne Frank was turned in for $1.68. It wasn't about the money. And America, you better wake up when you realize that we are open-armed, inviting different people because of wonderful ideals. Well, these wonderful ideals are based on a lie, and they're driven by hatred. And it doesn't take much of a rocket scientist to know that what we export in America, like pornography, like abortion clinics, what we export is consumed. That is why we are called the Great Satan. They are religiously motivated. Their numbers exceed 1 billion. And you know what? I don't see them aborting their children. I don't see them doing a lot of things we do as America, and I And I say that with a humble heart because the numbers are there. We all know how to count. I think it's 56 million. There's going to be a consequence of that. I do know this, that just a few years ago in Iran, they had something like the average woman had 6 or 7 children. Iran is being contaminated with the West. They now have 1.6. It's just less than a decade or two before there's going to have this massive generation of elderly people being taken care of by a very small number of workers. And that spells out World War III. When there's a very small population of workers and a very large population of people who feel entitled to be fed and taken care of. And look at France. France has a birth rate of what, 1.8 with a true normal Frenchman? Yet their Muslim population in France is 8.1. It's the exact opposite. So the writing is on the wall. And we need to understand that the writing cycle not only happened on a tetrad when the writing was on the wall, the 4 blood moons on the religious holidays, where the one empire fell to Darius, so the Babylonian fell to the Persians, and that's why the sacred elements were out, and all of that stuff, and that's what switched the Hebrews onto a lunar calendar. But that tetrad cycle has never lied, and maybe this will be the first tetrad cycle that hasn't resulted in a global shift of power. I do know this. My family loved God. They were equipped. They were morally strong. They were physically strong. They listened to the Holy Spirit, and they were a family. So of course they fled. Which father and mother wouldn't? They grabbed their kids. It happened so quick. The lights went out. The church was the first thing burned. They ran down a field in autumn with the itchy, scratchy brown grass grabbing at the legs of the children. And they got on a boat, and they fled. Ironically, I think that's the same vision Rick Wiles has with True News. Very similar. My book takes it one step farther, where next step is they're decrepit, they're old, they're sick, they're at severe post-trauma stress. The parents are clinically insane. And the sea is filled with dead Christians. The point being is if 1 billion people are empowered to hunt down the ideology of a different group of people, then there's not a lot they can do if the ideology of the people group is unarmed. Am I making myself really clear with that, Doug, or did I start rambling?
No, I'm. Man, you've got me listening, hanging on every word, because I think you're right on the money. And I just want to say, just to add to what you're saying, you know, there will be an element of any audience, and I even would say of our audience, because I talk to enough people who will say, well, you know, look, it's not, things are not going to happen here. We're different. There's a difference. There's that American exceptionalism, the normalcy bias included. But the fact of the matter is, it's already happening. We are seeing right now, you mentioned Rick Wiles, we're seeing Rick Wiles being harassed and in a very practical way. We're seeing laws being made that Coach Dave Daubenmire, I love this phrase, oh my goodness, I had it up yesterday on the quote of the day, but hate speech, what the heck is it now? Doggone it, Joe.
When the truth becomes hate speech?
No.
When hate speech, yeah, something about the truth becoming hate speech.
Yeah, hate speech is, to those who hate the truth is hate speech. Yeah, sorry, Coach, for messing that up. And by the way, happy birthday, Coach Dave Daubenmire today. But I apologize for messing that up. But the fact of the matter is, Doug, you're exactly right. And I see a time where we collectively and individually, you're not going to be able to say, well, homosexuality is bad, Islam is a cult, or anything derogatory about Islam or immorality or things of abhorrent in nature. And we're seeing it now, but it's going to get increasingly worse and oppressive, more oppressive. So it's coming.
Right in between your house, where you're at right now, and my house is Dearborn, Michigan. Okay? Now, maybe I'm crazy, but after a crisis, I love watching the news. Because the burning of the Reichstag moments, when Hitler burned the Reichstag, they blamed the commies. You know, he was given more powers act, and he became the supreme chancellor, just like in Star Wars. And when that happens in America, and we have these Reichstag moments, whether it's 9/11 or before that, where there was Oklahoma City that failed because of some offbeat cop that caught Timothy McVeigh, or before that, when it was the Olympic Games, and that offbeat guy, Richard Jewell, saw the bomb. And that was supposed to go off because the Clintons, I believe, and I lived in Atlanta during that time, and I've watched this religiously, there was the abortion clinic bomb. And they couldn't catch the guy, but they also, it seemed kind of weird that they couldn't catch the guy. I mean, he's blowing up abortion clinic doctors, and he's shooting abortion doctors, and he's a fanatic Christian, and he will face judgment. Now, those Reichstag moments, you can see life very clearly. After 9/11, I thought I was insane. I thought I was looking at a different country when I saw the people flood into the streets and fire off their weapons, including automatic weapons. But I wasn't insane, despite the fact they told me that that's not what I saw. But Dave and Joe, or Doug and Joe, I saw it. In Dearborn, Michigan, I saw the crowds, and I saw them shooting their weapons in celebration. Now, I looked and scanned everywhere for that video forever, okay? It just so happened I was in a coffee group with a bunch of rednecks, and I say to him, I swear I saw this. And the guy goes, oh, yeah, you know what's his face? He was taping at that time, and he taped CDs of them, and he mailed them out, and I got one. And we watched it, and it's true. And you think for a second that you can change history without accepting the consequence of changing histories? Because when Islam conquers a country, they kill everyone. Why do you think they're 98% Islam in most of the countries? Because they genocided the rest of the people. You tell me a historical narrative, except France and Europe, which their day's coming, where that has not proven true. And that historical narrative can touch us. And something's going to happen. God has used pagan cultures to conquer the godly forever, or the forsaken ones, those Christians who have forsaken their God.
If I can, Doug, if I can interject something here, thank you for bringing that up. On Hagmann and Hagmann.com, I have under the heading "Now This Is How It's Done." A video from Britain first. It's a political party established back about 4 years ago in Great Britain that by former members of the British National Party, and the head, the woman who's attempting to lead this party, is pretty outspoken against Islam and pretty lays it all out for people. Islam and immigration and everything our conservative Christian conservatives here in America would be clamoring for and are clamoring for. But she is so outspoken against what's taking place. You're exactly correct, Doug, in terms of the Islamic component to this, which. So, by the way, I just urge everyone to go to HagmannHagmann.com and click on that "Now This Is How It's Done" link and watch that video, and then go to Britain or go to Britain First via the link there, and I think you'll find it pretty enlightening. But you're so right, and isn't it funny, Doug? Don't you find it really interesting that the very people who who preach tolerance, who say we must be tolerant, or they're the first ones who are going to be on the chopping. Well, not the first ones, but they're going to be in a short line to the chopping block, literally, perhaps.
Tolerance is a double-edged sword. You don't think so? Go back to your memory or ask your kids about MTV Road Rules back in the day when they used to run these reality TV shows as if they're the pioneer of reality TV shows. They throw all these children in these terrible environments like these mansions by the sea in Hawaii, and each person had to accept the person's ideology next to them because they were tolerant. Well, if you throw 8 personalities in close proximity, it's like the Tom Clancy story, The Hunt for Red October. They're going to fight. You know, you can't put American battleships next to nuclear submarines from Russia and not have a problem. It's just who people are. Well, the fight in MTV Road Rules is almost worthy of a theological master's of divinity dissertation, because the first person who said anything judgmental was instantly attacked by the other 7. Period. And intolerance is making a stand that, you know, let's put tolerance and intolerance this way. My son goes to a public school, and under Common Core, it basically means that somehow or another in the math curriculum they talk about homosexuals, and in the science they do, and in all the curriculum they do. Okay, and I get his take on it, which is not politically correct. And you got to say, well, when they define tolerance as acceptance, that's intolerance. Tolerance, and I would say my son's name, is when they can preach it and flaunt it, and you don't shoot them. That's being tolerant, okay? Because they're different, and so be it. This is America, and you know what? If I want God crawling up into my character and revealing my heart, my Jeremiah 17 heart, that the human heart is wicked and deceptive and beyond cure, who can know it? You want God looking into my heart and my sins, and we are equal. I am simply covered because I come humbly before the cross daily. And in a broken, humble heart, I repent of the foothold that I have given Satan in my life. So having said that, the point being is the tolerant, always guilty, are always the ones who, those who preach tolerance are always the one who are violent to the point of death. As a social study, I did a book on this. It's called The Day of the Dog. And I just asked myself, if I took a Christian and made him intolerant, a Christian teenager, put him in a high school, and he was intolerant, he would not accept other people. He would speak into chaos, and he would not accept it. Could he be killed in 7 days? And out of that, that's an exercise in creative study. That wasn't probably a gift from God like the Dead Sea Souls is, or a vision from God, but it follows the same line. It equips the church to be intolerant, and it equips the church to better prepare for the worst, because the tolerant unite and kill you. Pixar, Little Birds on the Wire, they're all tolerant, you know, until the big one comes, and then they start pecking at the feet. And then it doesn't really go so well, if you remember the little narrative there.
Very eloquent. Very eloquently put. And folks, again, I urge you to listen very carefully. Re-listen to this broadcast. Wow, this is just fantastic. We're talking with Douglas K. Pearson, DouglasKPearson.com. Well, author, story maker, adventurer, and very eloquent speaker, I might add, engaging at least in my view, certainly engaging in the topics at hand. If I can stray here, we've got so many emails. It happens every program, and we're never going to get through all the emails that we got. But so many questions to you. If do you mind entertaining a couple of questions here from listeners?
It'd be an honor. It'd be an honor. Okay. And there's been many a time when I have called in totally riled about something, and it's been helpful.
Okay. One question here, in fact, it has to do with current events, and that being Ferguson. We're talking about tolerance, intolerance, and, of course, a number of things. But now to cross over into this agenda that appears to be taking place at Ferguson. And so, to the emailer, Mr. Pearson had spoke about this earlier, but let's revisit this. Do you see Ferguson growing here? The events at Ferguson seem to be pretty well choreographed. I'd written about that a couple of days ago, or the day the verdict came out. I believe this whole thing was choreographed. But what do you see taking place either at or as a consequence of Ferguson?
I believe Ferguson is choreographed as they made Sandy Hook. And there's chinks in the armor as big as daylight. But I feel bad for this family. And they have the right to grieve. And I'm a parent and a father. And if I lose a child, I will have a period of insanity. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I hope I have godly people around me who will knock some sense into me. But so be it. When you have a CNN reporter look at the camera and say, we don't know why people are so upset. We have been here covering this for 10 weeks. We have been asking people religiously for hours and hours and hours and giving them a platform to express themselves. And now they just erupt in a riot? And let me translate that. We've been throwing gas on the fire of this family's tragic loss. And it took 10 weeks to ignite this, partly because of the weather pattern, but it took a long time to ignite this into a full-blown blaze. And that is a damnation, Doug and Joe. That is a damnation to the ignorance of our people, and it's a call that the programming is in high gear, and it's an embarrassment to the journalism that has moved to entertainment. I was in graduate school at Wheaton during the Rodney King trial. So when I left the Rodney King trial after studying it in graduate school, which basically means the professor put the entire film in and watched Rodney King beat the living death out of, 6 cops, throwing one of them through the windshield head first because he was on, PCP or something. And,
yep.
He knocked the police officer's jaw 2 inches sideways after he missed the blow before and broke, every bone in his hand? And he struck with that much force and hit that police officer so hard. It's a 15-minute video where he just, my good night. He was like a man among boys. It was like me playing kung fu with my 3-year-old nephews on the beach. He just did whatever he wanted them to. The entire video, was shown in court, case dismissed. It's not very common, The problem is the media, in California especially, withheld the video. They just showed it over and over and over again. And right now, when you read the narrative of Ferguson, burn this bitch down, and I can say that in all confidence because they have said it on CNN about 55,000 times, and it's only day 3. That narrative, when you repeat it and program it, and you take a people group that thinks different, and that doesn't mean they think wrong, it just means they think different. Let me put it this way. I left Wheaton Graduate School, and I took a job in Marathon High School, and I became a coach. And I was shocked. The black kids on my basketball team thought, either O.J. Simpson was innocent or Robert, the riots in California, that the beating he should have been not indicted, and yada yada yada. And it's the same thing happening today. In other words, there's a people group that, whether through the plan or oppression, is still on the plantation. They are withheld information, and they will suffer the consequence. But if they are raising up a people group for ill purpose, eventually evil will get the upper hand. And like in ISIS smells bad, Doug and Joe. It smells of the CIA. It smells like they were in Ukraine. It smells like they were in Egypt. It smells like they were in Iraq. It smells like they were in Afghanistan. All of these countries toppled when ISIS was there. It smells like they were in Syria. And if Dr. Jim Garrow is right and ISIS is here, it will smell again. You cannot control evil. You think you can, but the virus will mutate. Hate mutates. It finds a way. It's like Jurassic Park. It cannot be controlled. You don't know what you're messing with when you call up the dead. And it will happen. It's inevitable, and I think it's unstoppable, and I think America has to come and face the fact and make their peace with God, because peace is the only thing that's going to get through this peace that you can't describe, because it's so irrational. Anybody can do the math. On millions of dollars in bills, and you're walking on a prayer walk, and your left hand touches your lips, and it touches the cross as you walk by. And there's a peace there. You're dead broke. There's no outlet. The infection is ravaging in your wife's body. The mental state is failing because of narcotics. Post-trauma is in. It's leading to all sorts of other mental conditions, and who knows what they are. And there comes a time where it's so out of control, there's no peace, yet there is peace. You just got to bend your knee at the foot of the cross, because he has suffered worse than most of us ever will. I don't want to take 40 lashes. Do you? Is it 39, one less death? I don't think I'd do really well. I mean, Mel Gibson, in his great film, depicted this. I don't think I could do that for the sake of humanity. Therefore, I submit to his authority. I come humbly before the throne. I come humbly before the cross, and I do it as much as I possibly can. So I hope that answers your reader.
Yeah, well said. Now a question from not too far away from us, in fact, right here from the studio. This is a question from me, Doug. How are you doing? How is your wife doing now? And you don't have to answer any of this. I don't mean to pry or to be personal, but is your wife getting better? I mean, are things getting better, more under control? Tell me as much or as little.
And thank you so much for the question. Sometimes when I go to my church, I had a T-shirt printed, "Don't ask me about my wife," and I would open my coat and show people, because we go to a big church, and, people don't know any better. It's just kind of flippant. But it's like, if you deal with this crap, 120 hours a week as a primary hair provider, you want to go to church just to get a breath of fresh air, then you're bombarded by people. So our church actually had to do a bunch of, educating the people, like any big church. If a person's going through suffering, give them some space. Let the Bible, let some pastors, let their friends do the work. But don't be so stinking contrite and ask them. And your question is not that. I am an author. I do live a public life. You can read about my inner struggles in my novels, whether it's hate or suffering or overcoming. It's all there. may God be praised because she has been redeemed. And she even had to handle almost a head-on collision the other day at 60 and still walked away from it. So it is good, but she was in that Bermuda Triangle of mess, which is narcotics, open wound, and a psychological condition. And that's a tough combination. We went to the Mayo Clinic and we built they built a wing of the hospital that involved top surgical doctors, that involved top detox doctors, that involved top post-trauma stress doctors. And they threw the book at her, and they got her back, and they saved her life. And I commend and will be thankful for the Mayo Clinic. I'll be thankful for my in-laws, because I thought we'd be broke 10 times over. But I'm just learning still this day that some families are just very giving. And people find a way, So thanks, but she is doing
good.
Really well. It does give me insight on detox, however, with America having 157 million Americans on prescription drugs, that in the event when the collapse does come, there's going to be a lot of imbalance going on. And your viewers should probably keep that in mind. 1 Second After by William Forsythe, probably a good read. As I think probably 90% of your viewers have already bought it and passed it on as Christmas gift. But
yes, 1 Second After, indeed. Well, we can get into hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but we can get into probably nearly 100 questions here. But the biggest one was really, and I see this outpouring of support for you from our listeners who are saying, please pass along our thoughts, prayers. We're praying for your guest. We're praying for his family as well. I just want to pass that along to you. There's a consistent theme here that I see taking place with the emails we're getting, and I think that speaks volumes. Not just for the quality of our listeners, but also to you as a man, and to you as an author, and of course a guest on our program. And it's just an amazing thing. I mean, these 3 hours have passed by so quickly, and I don't know how you feel about the interview, but certainly I feel that you've covered so much ground and given insight into your works. I'm so anxious to read the works that you've done. And by the way, I want to thank you. And folks, let me just say this. None of this was solicited by us. Hopefully, Doug, you can verify that. But certainly, we appreciate the offer for the downloads and the free downloads.
Well, I didn't want to let anything stand in the way of this vision. I mean, I don't really see the Apostle Paul saying, "Oh, I got a vision from God. I write the book to the Philippines, and I'm going to charge you for it." And I didn't really say that. I'm not saying this is the Bible, and I'm not saying I'm the Apostle Paul. All of heaven is laughing right now. I am saying this. Listeners, thank you so much. My family thanks you from the bottom of our hearts. And Doug and Joe, I ever said, even when I wrote you months ago, that this can be arranged where I am offering this, because this movement, this awakening in America, where pastors and Christians around are starting to teach people to equip themselves for difficulty, this is an awakening. And we are right on the front of it, and it's an honor. It's just an honor to be there. And I'm just glad I was there. But I want to tell you about these books. They're there. They're real. My story of my wife and healing is laughable. It's in the Florida Keys on one of our healing trips. Went down there. In closing, make sure you are taken care of in terms of survival and survival preparedness. And that site is fantastic. That supports your show, Doug, and I support them. Make sure you have your bartables, and you have taken care of your basic food. I don't know if we need years of supply of food because the depopulation will come so quick. There's probably plenty after. I know massive amounts die quick. But when the book, The Dead Sea Souls, went to the audiobook, and we're coming on the hour, right, Doug? Do I have a minute?
You got about a minute and a half, and the floor is yours.
Oh, man, 90 seconds. I can do this. When the book, The Dead Sea Souls, went to the audio group, and the techies were all there, and all 10 of them, and they're all telling how complicated the whole mess is, I said, I want this girl from my high school literature class to read it. Because when she read literature, the students listened. So I want Lindsay Snyder to read the book. And they go, we can't take anybody who's not a pro. And I finally convinced them, it's like, well, if she screws up, it's a $5,000 price tag. Well, I get called in the next day. We got to re-record. It didn't work. And I go, what happened, man? Lindsay's got the greatest voice. They asked me for 4 hours straight why they didn't sleep that night, because they felt the book was true. How could you speak truth? It has changed our hearts. Now, I'm not the most sharpest page in the Bible, but I do know this. Only God in prayer can change a heart. And if God can change those people at the studio, and if he can grab them so hard that they couldn't stop this young girl from reading the story, and they just were mesmerized by it and haunted, and they were up all night, and they came to me and wanted to know the peace of Christ Jesus. Is it real? Can it relieve them of the fear that haunted them? I mean, they were a messed up group of 12 people. And it can. Audience, it can. The peace. You take what you learn, you put it into practice, and the peace comes. And may the Lord Jesus Christ bless your show. May you keep speaking into chaos. Keep up the good work.
God bless you, my friend. Thank you so much for your gift of time and for all of your generosity, and just for you being you. God bless you, my friend. We will talk again.
Yeah, we'll do this again soon.
Virus is a book that should be discussed. Have your audience make sure they hit virus. We didn't even touch it tonight. It's a weapon on its own. You take the metaphor of virus, the A stages before it goes plague, and you make it into fear, and the fear has 7 stages before it goes plague across our land. And to answer that last listener, Ferguson can become a plague because it's fear and it's hate driven. And it's
Amen.
Fear and hate are real, and they can only be combated through self-sacrifice.
All right. Gosh,
Next time we have you on, that's what we'll hit, Mr. Pearson. God bless you. Thank you for all that you've done for us and for our listeners, and thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. God bless you and your wife. We hope you have a great holiday, and we hope to speak with you soon.
All right, buddy.
You're welcome. Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care. All right. Folks, that'll do it for us tonight. What an incredibly great program, at least in my view. Hopefully you felt the same way. Hopefully you felt the spirit move through Mr. Pearson. I'm sure you did. Tomorrow night I will be here, joined by Joe later, perhaps. Invite me to your Thanksgiving Day table here for those in the States. And for those outside of the States, it's, of course, a normal broadcast. God bless you. And also, wish Coach Dave Dobmeyer happy birthday, and on Sunday a very special program. More on that on the website later. Till tomorrow, God bless. Good night.